Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing Resident Evil 7 Gold Edition and Resident Evil Village Gold Edition on Switch 2. Thanks to Capcom for providing early access to these versions of the game. So this Friday, at least at the time of making this video, Resident Evil Requiem is coming out, included on the Switch 2, but on the same day, we're getting Village and 7 on Switch 2. I'm going to be taking a look at performance and how it looks in handheld versus Steam Deck at the same time, so you guys know what to expect. When it comes to storage, we're talking about 24.5 gigs for Village, including all the DLC, and for Resident Evil 7 with all DLC, 20.9 gigabytes, so if you were wondering, more than enough space to put these games. Resident Evil Village on PC is more like 37 gigs, and Resident Evil 7 can go much higher to like 60 gigabytes or something like that. Huge texture quality, I guess that's the reason. So yeah, I think the sizes are completely fine for games of this caliber, at least when it comes to Switch 2. So let's start with Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. So regarding Resident Evil 7, it's a 60 FPS target, I noticed it right away, and after playing this on PC for a few years since it came out, I do notice that at native resolution even, the game does have some artifacts at the edges of the screen. It's TAA mixed with FXAA, there's not much that you can really do. I'm not really noticing them using the interlace mode that they have on PC that really increases performance significantly. This seems to be native resolution or maybe upscaled a tiny bit using TAA from the engine's perspective. I tried it on a 4K TV OLED because this game also supports HDR both in handheld, which doesn't look great on handheld mode when it comes to HDR because LCD screen. At least to my eye, it seemed to be above 1080p. When it comes to graphics settings, it was pretty close to medium to high settings on PC, again, just from my eyesight's perspective. I play a lot of that game on PC. Shadows, especially the static ones, have a little bit of staircase effect, especially on the walls. That's usually related to the shadow quality. A mix of medium and high seems to be something like that. There's also some screen space reflections on static objects that are missing. Very few. It's similar to the reflection quality on PC on the second option, which is called on, and between brackets it says variable, so some areas have reflections, some others don't, but again, very minor difference. And when it comes to the performance itself, they're targeting 60 FPS, and so far I was able to drop it below 60 a few times. But similar to the PC version, when you're traversing from one place to the other, especially from old to new areas, you might see a stutter when opening the doors. That's pretty common in Resident Evil 7, at least in my experience with the game itself. When it comes to texture quality, the textures are pretty crisp, but not matching the highest settings on PC, obviously. But so far it's been a solid experience. Again, those drops when there is a door opening up very quickly, followed by a camera movement. Even going outside after the first big part of the game, I didn't have much of a problem. Even with the effects on screen, when you have the flamethrower later on in the game, I don't notice any real slowdown. Again, really minor things. This game has a very closed environment, excepting the back of the house that you go back and forth a few times. When it comes to handheld, I still notice the same thing, but at a lower resolution. Doesn't seem to be downgrading texture quality or shadows one bit. Seems to be matching the dock version, but with a lower resolution, so that's pretty obvious. You can still notice, again, the artifacting of TAA, pretty common from TAA games. They're blurry, especially as you move forward. You might notice the objects having some fuzziness to it. Again, TAA mixed with FXAA, that's usually a recipe for blurriness. But again, on this game, at least in my experience, it's pretty common, so I wish they used DLSS for this one, maybe implemented that in the game on their engine. But in this iteration of the engine, not even on PC we have DLSS, you have to mod that in, and they didn't do that effort on this port, unfortunately, but I think that would have made a huge difference when it comes to image quality. But especially on the smaller screen, you don't really notice that much. But to me, it's a very solid way of experiencing Resident Evil 7, and it includes all the DLC. Then regarding Resident Evil Village, on docked mode and handheld mode, it's a similar choice of settings to Resident Evil 7. Seems to be a mix of medium and high on PC. In some things, on shadows, I notice it's more towards medium. When it comes to draw distance, high settings seems to be more of a common occurrence, at least visually. There's some foliage that doesn't move in some parts of the game, very, very subtle, that have more physics on the PC version. Again, you have to know them side by side to notice the difference. Again, resolution is probably close to native, but with a little bit of upscaling using the internal TAA plus FXIA solution. In this game, you can also choose between first person and third person. Personally, I'm more of a third person guy. So on Resident Evil 7, you're forced to play first person, but here, just for visibility and ease of play, I use third person, but you can swap back and forth if you want to. And I have way more hours in this game in comparison to Resident Evil 7. And when it dropped the most for me is the first time you see the village at the beginning of the game, that you see the entire thing in one shot with the camera. There it drops significantly, like into the 40s. You can notice the slowdown, even if you're not used to seeing frame rates going up and down like me, that I see this stuff all day. Then the other one was the Lycan fight at the start of the village. That one also drops pretty hard, especially when you go to the edge of the map and look at a big place of the village with the Lycans at the same time. But another part where I dropped performance pretty hard was when I was going to Luisa's house, which again is at the very beginning of the game as well. When you're shooting the Lycans and all that, and you have a lot of moving foliage below you, and you see a big part of the village, it drops insanely hard. Again, you have to be looking towards places where there's stuff into the distance. In the village, it's pretty common, but in the village, you don't do the most combat of the game. Most of the game is smaller, tight corridors, especially when it comes to getting to the other areas of the game. There's also parts with foliage, but it feels more like a corridor, so performance is not that bad. But then when I got to the castle was pretty solid overall. But when I got to one of the first sisters that has bugs that attack you, that's one of the parts where I test a lot on the PC version. When the bugs get very close to the screen, the closer you are, the more they appear. That drops into the mid-30s sometimes. As soon as you go ahead and continue and hide from them, you go back up into 60, no problem. So it's varying between 35 and 60 across the board, but in here is way more noticeable than in Resident Evil 7. Here, you have the traversal spikes in the frame time, so there's a drop in performance sometimes when you're going through a door and moving the camera looking to a new place. That's pretty common in RE Engine. But in this game in particular, I think it drops way more aggressively, especially, again, effects on screen, stuff into the distance, especially in the village. Indoors is better, but as soon as there's a big amount of effects, that's when you notice it the most, and the game suffers when it comes to performance pretty significantly. It's way more obvious if you're using a screen, so the Switch being docked. In handheld mode, this is way less noticeable because you have VRR, so variable refresh rate on the screen, so it goes down to the 40s and the 60s. You're not running VSync over there, just the screen is matching the frame rate, so for most people it will be less obvious. I consider this game more of an unlocked frame rate experience, just between 35 and 60 depending on what's going on. But I think it's still pretty solid. It's just, you might feel it inconsistent if you played this game before and you're used to a flat frame rate like on the PS5 version, but again, this is a portable device. So yeah, clearly Village is way more demanding and it's not as solid as RE7 on Switch 2. But let's now take a look at how it looks on the hands and compare it against the Steam Deck. Alright guys, so welcome to the comparison for RE7, Steam Deck at the left, Switch 2 at the right. Disclaimer before I start, this is very difficult to capture like this with a camera pointing to the screen. We have an OLED screen at the left and an LCD screen at the right. Both are different resolutions, but the camera distance was the same. The angle of the devices were the same as well. Same settings when it comes to capture. But again, it's very difficult to get them one-to-one when it comes to lighting conditions, how the screen reacts to being recorded with a camera. So I'm doing my best here. It won't be 101% perfect, but I think we can draw a huge amount of conclusions from this. So anyways, let's get started. Reminder, the Steam Deck is 800p, the Switch is 1080p, and well, the game on the Steam Deck is 800p native, whether it's docked or not. Remember that the Steam Deck runs the same whether it's plugged in or not. The Switch 2, when it's docked, increases its power, so it gets a higher resolution. And at least here, my main gripe with it is the ghosting on the Switch's 2 screen. I mean, if you look at it, the ghosting in motion is more over there. Also, when it comes to color, obviously the OLED screen is better. And despite being LCD, it also does have HDR. I'm using the stock settings for both of them. So while the LCD looks darker, in real life, just the camera thing, the darks are way better on the OLED. I would have lowered the HDR a little bit further so it's darker. Same thing when it comes to motion clarity in motion. I mean, yeah, I mean, look at that on the Switch 2. The screen response time, holy hell, the ghosting versus an OLED panel, obviously, but still, both are 60 frames. The Switch 2 is a higher resolution, definitely. But again, I'm not sold on the screen quality on Switch 2, but that's besides the point. It's just, once we get an OLED Switch 2, this will be figured out, I'm pretty sure. One of the things that I noticed right away was the shadow maps have that banding across them. This is very similar, at least on Switch 2, to the medium to high shadows on PC. When you get close to it, I think it's pretty clear. It's pretty similar when it comes to settings. Again, on Steam Deck, it's medium to high settings, high on the shadows. So on Switch 2, it seems to be a match. Alright, so now a scene with more motion and stuff. I think it's pretty obvious at the left which one is the lower resolution, especially the edges here. We're using TAA plus FXAA from the game itself. The amount of shadows seems to be the same, just some color changes here and there because different screens, hard to match them perfectly on a camera. So yeah, shadows are the same, at least they look like the same, but resolution is higher. Yeah, maybe it's 900p on Switch 2. Not quite 1080p when I looked at it in real life. But still, it looks pretty damn solid on the Switch 2 smaller screen. But again, yeah, resolution is the main one, at least in my opinion. I gotta go ahead and skip the gore, so give me 1 sec. Thanks, YouTube. Okay, so here we go. We grab the pistol. Oh man, the ghosting. When I'm playing the game on Switch 2, the ghosting is not as noticeable. We're playing the footage at 0.25. So let me put it at 50% speed. It's still noticeable, but not as much. But again, I was playing both of them. And yeah, I did notice that the ghosting. So if I was looking at them side by side in real life, you can notice it. But when I was playing on the Switch 2, before I did the comparison, it wasn't really distracting, especially at 60 frames per second. You get the part where it catches on fire. This on PS4 really dropped performance back then. But on Switch 2, I didn't notice any drops below 60, even in this section. Okay, both of them cast shadows. Obviously a lower resolution on Steam Deck, just look at the car. But again, the shadows seem to be a match. Again, this is high shadows on Steam Deck, which matches the PC version, of course. It's the PC version at the end of the day. And there's also this haloing effect around Jack. And on the Switch 2, I'm noticing worse reflections. If you look at it at the back, I said before that on the Switch 2, they are using from the 3 reflection options, you have off, on, and it says variable or on. This on the Switch 2 seems to be in the middle. Here, reflections on Steam Deck are on, so some surfaces don't have screen space reflections. It's a difference that I noticed, so more things have reflections on the Steam Deck settings. But again, that's a very minor thing. But when it comes to the rest, it does look the same to me. I don't notice much of a difference when it comes to settings, other than the reflections and the resolution. So the Steam Deck has the advantage on those extra reflections across some of the parts of the game. And the Switch 2 has the advantage on the resolution, definitely. If you look at it side by side there, when we are farther away, it's more obvious which one has a higher resolution. Very minor difference, you're not going to really notice it, especially unless you are getting very close. Just a tiny bit better when it comes to the volumetric lighting. Image stability. Looking at this fan, that is something in motion. Yeah, clearly the Switch 2 is a higher resolution, as I said before, but the TAA of the game plus the FXAA make it pixelate even at this resolution. very closely at a freaking door. Yeah, I know, what a waste. But if you look at the door there, the Switch has a little advantage on texture quality. You can increase the texture quality to high on Steam Deck. I put it on medium to avoid some of the traversal stutter, but definitely shadow texture quality here is superior. You can again increase this on Steam Deck at the cost of some stability. So this is optional, but I think you can notice the difference. Just put it on high if you want it to match on Steam Deck, but it's not on all assets, mostly on these doors and dynamic objects, but on the ground they seem to be the same resolution, at least when it comes to textures. Alright, so we're now looking at Resident Evil Village. Here I had the opposite problem to RE7 when it comes to capturing footage. Now the Switch 2 got too bright and the Steam Deck got way better when it comes to colors, so again, apologies on that. This issue hit Resident Evil 7, but at least now it hits the same thing but on the opposite direction. I personally didn't notice any evidence of dynamic resolution. Seems to be a static resolution but a bit below 1080p. Steam Deck I'm using native, so 800p. And yeah, clearly I can see on Rose's hair the pixelation on Steam Deck in comparison to the Switch 2 there. The extra pixels really do help, especially when using TAA. Right, so now looking at, let me slow it down. Yeah, shadow quality seems to also be a match. We're using medium shadows on Steam Deck. So probably a mix of medium and high when it comes to shadow resolution. Yeah, it's pretty similar. I'm guessing it's medium shadows. Alright, another look at the shadow quality. Before that though, the foliage, yeah, it's definitely a higher quality option. It's probably the mesh quality, it's called on the PC version. This is lower on Steam Deck, so the foliage will take a hit. Clearly a higher resolution asset. Shadow quality appears to be the same. Yeah, definitely the foliage looks worse. And it's on medium. Interesting. I'm not sure if this is a dynamic thing in the game, but it looks great. Definitely the trees look way better on Switch 2. Yeah, without a doubt. Also the foliage. But man, the trees. The Switch 2 wipes the floor with the tree quality, especially, yeah, on the foliage. Interesting. Well, also the resolution improvement on Switch 2 really does help it. But the fog is pretty thick, unless, again, there's something dynamic going on. Looks pretty damn solid. Place I wanted to take a quick look at was the castle. So let's see. Yeah, definitely you can notice the resolution difference, especially in smaller details. That's what really, the section of the game that really made me notice resolution changes the most, because there's small detail. Yeah, way more stable in motion when it comes to the Switch 2. Again, a product of the higher resolution. So yeah, clearly an improvement with stuff into the distance. Just the nature of a higher pixel count. Just the ghosting. The ghosting is my biggest gripe with it. So yeah, definitely regarding both of them, the Switch 2 is the superior version, at least when it comes to Village. It was closer on RE7, but on Village I can clearly see the improvements, outside of the resolution obviously. But the shadows seems to be a pretty close match to medium on PC. The draw distance seems to be more like high, same with effects on Switch 2. And the resolution is higher. Just tweak the HDR to make the game look as best as you can. And again, pointing the camera at the screen doesn't give amazing results for comparisons, but at least I can show you kinda what the difference between them are. But so far, yeah, both ways of playing the game are fantastic, but Village is definitely a win on Switch 2. But no version, in my opinion, is a bad way to experience the game. Both work fantastically well out of the box. And plus, on the Switch version, you do have the option to play docked, and docked actually works pretty damn well. Seems to be a bit higher than 1080p, maybe I'm wrong on that one, but it did look pretty sharp on docked mode. Because when you dock the Switch 2, you get the performance improvement, so they can go at a higher resolution, which doesn't happen on Steam Deck. Hopefully on the next Steam Deck 2, you can plug it in and use it docked with higher wattages. Another thing that I forgot to mention for Switch 2, it does have motion controls. The Steam Deck also does have them using Steam Input, no big problem. And oh, one more thing, the ambient occlusion seems to be a bit superior on Steam Deck. We're using AMD's CACAO, and Switch seems to be using SSAO, at least at first glance, it seems to be that way. But yeah, motion controls, it's on Switch 2 officially, which is awesome to see. Works with the Joy-Cons and works with a Pro Controller. On Steam Deck, it's just a matter of enabling it in Steam Input, and you can use motion controls as well for aiming. But that's about it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Thanks again to Capcom for providing a code, an early code of both of these games. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see ya next time. Bye guys. Thanks for watching.